Hello and welcome to Fringe Pod. My name's Andy Beecroft. I am the Marketplace Manager with Adelaide Fringe's International Arts Marketplace, Honeypot. Before we begin today, I would like to acknowledge that we meet today on the lands of the Ghana people and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm joined today by Alex Wright, who is one half of the internationally renowned award-winning UK theatre group, Wright Grainger. Wright Grainger make works wound from music and spoken word. It's our great pleasure to welcome you today. We're going to be talking about Onward Touring and success stories within your experience and journey through Honeypot. So before we get onto the Honeypot success stories and Onward Touring journeys, I think it's great if we just maybe start from the beginning. We'll just wind it back to when you kind of first started as Wright Grainger. So just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how Wright Grainger came about.
Well, we went to school together, Phil and I. So we've known each other since we were 14 or 13, 14. And we went to school and we learned, we were playing in bands together and we were making work together and kind of in the school plays together. So we've known each other for, flipping ages. And then both of us just kind of got rolling, really. Kind of straight out of school, Phil started working as a magician and a children's entertainer. I went to university and did not a lot of studying and quite a lot of faffing around making theatre. So our kind of working lives have not come from anything to do with any kind of formal training or any kind of precise qualification in anything. Has just come from us kind of adventuring around and following the clues and what feels like exciting stuff to do.
Yeah. And when was the first time you did a Fringe festival as Wright Grainger? Like what kind of led you into the presenting work?
As Wright Grainger, we only decided to call ourselves Wright Grainger a few years ago because we just kept having to add names to our name. So I was running a company called the Flanagan Collective. Phil was running a company called Gobbledygook. So for a while we were called the Flanagan Collective and Gobbledygook. Then we made a show called Orpheus, and then a show called Eurydice, so we kind of called ourselves Orpheus and Eurydice. And then we made a show called The Gods, The Gods, The Gods. So then we kind of called ourselves Orpheus, Eurydice and The Gods, The Gods, The Gods. And then it got out of hand, so we just decided to call ourselves by our surnames, because that was easier. So as Wright Grainger, we only kind of started calling ourselves that quite recently. But the first Fringe festival that Phil and I ever did together was in 2007 at Edinburgh Fringe with a terrible play that I wrote that Phil did an admirable job of being in. But that was our first Fringe festival in 2007. So we've kind of been trundling around the traps for whatever that many years is. A lot. What is that many years? 17 years?
It's like 7 years. No, sorry, 17 years. 2007, sorry. 17 years,
Yeah, so we did about 17 years, yeah.
I was thinking 2017, yeah. That's when I started with Adelaide Fringe, when I was young and carefree and didn't know what Australia really was, Australia's festivals were really like in terms of the size and scale.
Yeah, and same, we kind of went to Edinburgh not knowing the scale of it. We took the year that we first went in 2007, I took 2 shows up, this bad play Tapestry, and a production of Trainspotting, which in retrospect is a stupid thing to go and do at Edinburgh Fringe Festival when none of you are Scottish, bad move. And we were offered a slot for Trainspotting at like 5 to midnight or something. We went, yeah, that'll probably be okay. It was hard work, and doing a piece of new writing was hard work and kind of just diving into that landscape and trying to figure it out as you go. I think probably has been a habit that Phil and I have fallen into and repeated a lot over the years. We're going, that sounds like a good avenue or a good place to be, or some other cool people are going there and, that feels like a good time. So we'll go and do that. But there'll be other people who have been far better informed about the landscape of what those festivals have been before they went to them. We've just always gone and done something, and that's always just led on to the next thing. But those first few years in Edinburgh were a wild learning curve.
Yeah. And what did you come away with, sort of, presenting work at one of the world's biggest arts festival? Like, what were the learnings in those first couple of years?
Very good question. So in 2007, we did those 2 shows, and I guess learnt a lot about what you're doing and why. And because we come from the middle of nowhere, really. We live in very rural North Yorkshire and grew up in very rural North Yorkshire, and kind of it's quite astounding to the point that you realise the ideas that you have in a real microcosm of the world. Take them to somewhere like Edinburgh Fringe, which has so much energy and different people's artistry and different ideas and huge different ambitions in it. You very quickly realise how the articulation of your ideas stands up or stands within a huge framework of lots of other stuff that's going on. But what we did do is also, and that's a really valuable thing to realise and to learn, also quite a difficult thing to realise and to learn. The other things that we did do is start to, meet a huge amount of other peers and artists and people who are making work and wrangling with stuff. And we were, the stuff that we were wrangling with was the stuff that we felt was important or interesting when we were 19, and we were wrangling, and that all those things are very important and very interesting, but we were wrangling with it very inelegantly. And then to see work, which we saw work that year which genuinely changed our lives. We saw Ontron Good's Smile Off Your Face that year in 2007. We saw Fuerza Bruta that year in 2007, and these were these shows which changed the way that both Phil and I understood theatre and how it could work. And also understood the capacity of a Fringe festival to be able to host that type of work. For you not to have to wait for someone to give you permission to do something, but to get on and do it and make it and try and conceive of something which you haven't seen before and make that happen. The Fringe festivals are a beautiful place to do that. So that was really valuable, I think.
Yeah, I think Fringe festivals are a really important. They're an important environment to track your professional development journey. You learn a lot about yourself, but you also learn a lot about the industry and the people that put work on, and it helps develop what your work is by being surrounded by so many different works and creatives.
For sure, and the concentration of stuff is amazing, and exhausting, and inspiring, and overwhelming. Mm-hmm. The amount of stuff. In Edinburgh specifically, because it kind of starts at 9 a.m. and goes on till 5 a.m. and there's only kind of 3 or 4 hours a day where there's stuff not happening. Adelaide is a much more kind of holistically enjoyable experience, I think, compared to Edinburgh. But Fringe festivals where the whole existence of them is to allow people to throw stuff at a wall and see what sticks is amazing. Because you see some things where there's 5% of it which is incredible and 95% of it which is a waste of time, but the 5% is the value, is what someone's been allowed to do without waiting for a producing house to give them permission and space to do it. And because in 2008 there was a huge financial crash and crisis, we grew up as theatre makers without any resource or capacity. So the only resource and capacity we had was what we could find or what we could make happen ourselves with our own very tiny budgets or overdrafts that we could sneak a couple of £100 out of to go and buy some wood and build some stuff or whatever. And Fringe festivals were the only place that we could funnel that work into, in the hope that people would see it and that would grow. And I think we're broadly still doing the same thing. We just got better at it.
Yeah. And fast forward 5 years, 2012, I believe, was your first Adelaide Fringe experience. What was the journey between Edinburgh and eventually coming over to Australia? Like, what led to that? And what was the decision and rationale behind coming here?
Well, I came in 2012 because a theatre company that I ran out of university called Belt Up Theatre, which was me, a guy called Jethro, a guy called Jamie, and a guy called Dom. We made kind of small-scale immersive work and had been doing that since 2007, 2008. So that company got invited out here by Guy Masterson and Joanne Hartstone to do a play called The Boy James that I'd written and a play called Outland, which Dom had written. So I wasn't in any of those shows, I'd just written one of them. So they came out, I'd also directed a cabaret called Hot by Damsel Sophie that came out, and we brought some really small-scale kind of storytelling stuff for young audiences. So just kind of a combination of things made it feel worth coming. And I only came out for 10 days or something, so I was busy doing a different, working on a different show back home. And I got off the plane. I'd come a stupid route because I didn't know how flying to Australia worked. I'd sat in Dubai for 16 hours or something, and then come to Melbourne, and then come to Adelaide. And I got into Adelaide at 11 p.m. and came to meet some mates who were at a wildly weird and wacky cabaret night at Tuxedo Cat on North Terrace, I think, at the time. And Will Greenway and Stuart Bowden were busy doing something weird and wonderful. And it was just this, it was like walking into a parallel, brilliant, beautiful universe. Like all of a sudden arriving here and going, this is what's allowed. This is how things work in Adelaide. This is what like people are making and playing with and pushing at. And it felt very different to the kind of sensibilities I was used to encountering in the UK. There's something about Australian theatre makers, I guess, but like more kind of comedians and storytellers and burlesque artists and cabaret artists that seem to have grown up with different sensibilities to the kind of quite proper theatre making where told is correct and valuable in the UK. So arriving in 2012 and seeing that changed my horizons as to what was possible with storytelling. And I think especially Stuart Bowden, especially Will Greenway, there is I still really hold them and their peers up as quite inspiring people to have encountered at that time. So then when we came back next in 2016, the work that I brought back then with Joanne Hartstone felt much more like storytelling work, or some of it did. We did a show called Fable, which felt much more like a storytelling show. And kind of since then, Phil and I have worked together pretty much consistently on everything we've done. And more and more and more, we've landed more and more and more in that storytelling world, which is quite nice because in the Boy James and Outland, those two immersive shows that we brought in 2012, created a whole world, and we're the opposite of storytelling shows. An audience came and sat in a world that we'd built and constructed, and that world was whole and rich and complex and poetic and all that stuff. And now we're at the opposite end of that spectrum, but I still think pushing a similar level of immediate relationship to an audience. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we would have got there if it wasn't for seeing the kind of Australian work that was doing a similar thing.
Yeah. And what was that experience like? The first time you came out with Phil as well. Like, did you come away from that season feeling like there was opportunity here, or it was more of a like we did it? It was a challenge. It's a long distance to come, but actually maybe we're gonna take that work back home and develop it. Or was there an idea, a conception like, let's see if we can do something in
Phil
Australia?
and I played terribly fast and loose. So the first year that we brought a Wright Grainger show, we brought Orpheus out in 2018. But Phil came. I couldn't come because I was directing something else. And while Phil was flying here, I was organising someone else to do my part in Orpheus. So Vince Fusco said he'd do it because he'd seen a show that I was doing in 2016. Vince was like, "Oh yeah, I can do that." So Phil met Vince for the first time when he walked off the plane, and then the next day they did a show together with no real rehearsal or preparation in again a venue that Joanne Hartstone was running, and I can't remember why we I can't remember why we programmed it. Just because it felt like a good idea, probably. But it went super well, and it won an award and got really lovely reviews. And so at that point, we kind of thought, there's some, real value in that. And I think from that point, it just became part of the place that we wanted to bring and showcase. Showcase sounds like a horrible, like, kind of corporate word, and I don't mean it in a corporate way. A place to tell our stories at a point where they'll meet other artists and other audiences where there's value in that exchange. Mm-hmm. And the equivalent place in the UK was a place called Vault Festival, which was running under Waterloo train station, which I think it's just about to relaunch. It's kind of had a difficult few years in finding a new home for itself, because the tunnels it was occupying changed hands, I think. But Vault Festival was equally set up with this beautiful capacity for artists to play with stuff, try stuff out, meet audiences, and know more about their work by the end of it. And so both those places felt really useful. Vault Festival we haven't done for a little while, but Adelaide's become a real key cornerstone in how we develop our work. And the main part of that is a combination of the community that we've built out here. It feels like home away from home now, which is brilliant considering it's 11,000 miles away or whatever. The audiences and the kind of community in those audiences, but also the industry and what you do with Honeypot in bringing that industry together and creating an environment where the industry can meet the work and do that with a conscious consideration of what might happen next. We haven't found anywhere else in the world that does that. In Edinburgh, it's just like a bullfight, a fun bullfight, but it's a bullfight. Whereas in Adelaide, it's a real gorgeous kind of setup to do that. So now most new work that we make, we think, let's see where and when that can land in Adelaide in order that we can have these conversations with these people about what happens next.
Yeah. And you've touched upon sort of the industry-focused element of Adelaide Fringe, Honeypot, obviously. Were you aware of Honeypot when you brought the work in 2018, or was that something that you heard about while you were in Adelaide at the time? And if so, like, what was your, if you remember, what was your experience of Honeypot that first year?
I can't remember. I remember in 2016 being aware of just the amount of incredible people with huge experience and massive brains and loads of know-how all being in a room together with a level of calm generosity which I'd never experienced before. And the fact that you could hang out and then have a beer with the person that runs this huge festival, or from this massive organisation, or from this big initiative, or whatever, and that in the UK we'd spend ages trying to find ways to have cups of tea with people, emailing theatres and going, hello, I'm a theatre maker, I run a very small company, do you have time for a cup of tea? And some people would, and some people wouldn't. And that's fine, because that's just how busy they are. But then we'd drive, 4 or 5 hours or something to go and have a cup of tea with someone that runs an organisation. And sometimes it was brilliant. Sometimes they'd go, what do you want? We'd be like, obviously for you to put on our work. That's why I've just driven 5 hours to talk to you. And they go, we don't really do what you do. We go, okay, I'll go home then. But the ability, it was palpable, that kind of ability in those Honeypot setups in those earlier years, going, wow, like this is a truly remarkable, again, resource sounds like a horrible kind of corporate word, but connections, yeah, and collection of people to have put together in a room. And then every year since then, that's just become more and more the case.
Yeah.
And we've made more and more friends through it, which is beautiful, because we've sat and had cups of tea or beers or whatever with people who, Lord knows how we would have met them otherwise. And I think it feels like everyone in that room, and the way you put that together, feels like they're genuinely there just to meet a lot of other peers, a lot of other people who are making work and creating work, and to see what might fit together or what might be exciting. And I don't know how you send out your invitations or how you articulate that invitation to people from, what is now, nearly 400 people, 400 delegates from around the world. How you articulate those invitations, but whatever way you do it creates such a open and generous space that it's second to none. Like it really is the best place we've found to have those chats.
Yeah, I think it's important to differentiate the size and scale and makeup of Edinburgh versus Adelaide, which I think sometimes people make a comparison because they're both quite industry focused. festivals and platforms, but you sort of alluded to the nature of Edinburgh being a 24-hour city nearly.
Big time.
People are out. People scatter into the crowds, and it's hard for you to kind of have a collective focal meeting point. Whereas I think Adelaide's it's really great that we have that ability to be able to bring industry here and put them all into a room with artists and generate those conversations, connections. Are there any memories of that first Honeypot and connections you made in that first year?
Yeah, I spent a while looking at the queue of people wanting to talk to the Sydney Opera House man. The Sydney Opera House man. It was a guy called Jamie, and I watched that queue and I was like, oh, that's too many people. So I went and got a beer and put it next to him and went, there you go. He was like, oh, thank you. So we made friends with him afterwards. And we never, we didn't make any work with him, but it was nice to see him at different places around the world when we were all in the same place. And also I remember chatting a lot to Craig Harrison, who's now the producer of the 27 Club. But he was running a new online platform for touring work and how to kind of showcase touring work online, which sounded very similar. It was like a global version of a platform we were booking work through in the Highlands of Scotland, and really enjoyed getting to know him and his work. And we're still pals, we see each other at these festivals and still in touch across the year. So there's a few people that I'm really pleased to have met and now have known for 8 years. But then as the years go on, that system has just got more and more erudite, I think. And also we've got better at knowing who we want to talk to and why, and what people are interested in or not interested in, and what we're able to offer and not able to offer. But yeah, the queue, looking at industry delegates, just receive so much information. It's quite incredible, how they kind of manage to go, oh yeah, that's for me. Oh yeah, that's not for me. That's good. Okay, that might be for me, but I'll have to chat to you in a bit after it. There's some big days for that lot. Yeah.
What do you think Alex of now would tell Alex of 2016 approaching Honeypot? What advice would you give yourself?
Chill out. Don't worry about it so much. I think quite consistently I find myself of the opinion that if something doesn't happen right now, that conversation or opportunity or capacity for that thing to happen will shift or disappear. Phil is of the opposite opinion. He's like, oh, if that's going to happen, it'll happen. And we need to do lots to make sure we're being good at it, but that, those things don't exist for a day. They're like, if that's a good conversation, that conversation will still be there in a month or 6 months or a year or 2 years. And the more we do it, the more it turns out Phil's right, which is a good thing. But I think listening is really useful. I find it way more useful now to listen to what an organisation is interested in or busy doing, because I know my work and I know what I'm doing. So if I can listen to what someone else is doing, and then I'll be far more articulate and going, oh, well, there's this project that I'm doing that sits with what you're interested in, what you're busy making, rather than sitting down and trying to tell someone 8 projects that I'm working on and hoping they go, oh yeah, that one fits. So I think that capacity to sit and listen and to learn about other people, rather than feel like you have to always be on the sell, would be a nice thing to have had the whole time.
Yeah, I think it's for a lot of people it's coming back to a festival, coming back to Honeypot. You start to learn a lot about yourself and what you're presenting and how to approach people. I think your first couple of times in Honeypot are potentially a little bumpy on there's some unknown knowns and unknown not knowns, but as you go on you kind of develop a certain way of expressing what you do and developing as a creative. What do you think? How do you think Honeypot and Adelaide has kind of impacted your career as an artist and a creative?
Oh, hugely. a considerable measure of the work that we have and make and do exists because of Honeypot. And some of that is stuff that we still haven't realised in reality, in actuality yet, but conversations and projects that we've been talking about for however long. And some things are the fact that we're currently on tour for 4 months in Australia and New Zealand is because of Honeypot. So some things which feel annually very immediately linked to that marketplace, and then some things which are longer term but still concretely linked to that marketplace, and then other things which are just kind of long form, slightly less tangible stuff. So we tour Australia quite a lot now, which is lovely. That's all because of Honeypot, and that normally happens around January to beginning of January to the end of April. To the end of April. We tour New Zealand, and that's because of Honeypot, because we met someone in Honeypot who introduced us to someone else. So, one step removed, but also but that's still there. Some big projects that we have, hopefully, in the pipeline coming up is all because of Honeypot, and some dear friendships that are part of that is because of Honeypot. But also, in 2019, we sat down with Darren Lee Cole from Soho Playhouse, and I'd taken a show to his theatre in 2015, I think, but we didn't know each other, and just started a friendship with him, and I'm just really grateful for his friendship. Like, I love working with him, and we've made a big show with him and taken shows to his theatre, but also he came to my wedding and he's just a great pal, and that's good of Honeypot. So there's those things where you go, oh, I'm just really pleased that I know all these people, because Andy organised them to be in a room at the same time. So thanks.
You're welcome. Where was my invite to the wedding? No. No, Darren's a great guy, and I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there, really. It's about generating relationships, connections, and friendships. Those are things that take time to develop and nurture, and that's very much the same with outcomes and Onward Touring. They don't just happen. No, not always just happen straight off the back of a season. Sometimes it can take, like you say, you've kind of mentioned that there's stuff in the pipeline now that might have taken years to do. But it can take time. But I think there's a significant impact that can be generated through taking part in a marketplace, in a festival. If you present work in those environments. What sort of are there any specific outcomes and opportunities that have happened because of Honeypot? Let's take the first time off the back of Honeypot you were booked to, I think, present regionally or in Bunbury, I think. What was one of the first outcomes, if you could
first
elaborate?
Outcomes? I think when we went to Perth and Bunbury because those people had heard of our work through... Oh, we definitely went to Perth because Justin had heard of our work, but then actually we met Justin in Edinburgh. Bunbury, we met them in 2019, and then we ended up going to them in last year, 2023, for the first time. But we sat down with them at a table in 2019 just because we were like, oh, who are you and what happens at your festival? Not because we've gone, oh, we must get to Bunbury. And now it's one of our absolute favourite places. And that kind of just lovely accidental meeting has forged some really strong creative kind of connections, but also just lots of good pals, which is a treat. So Bunbury was good. We have been trying for a long time to take work to Bondi Festival and keep getting scuppered. We got scuppered by a pandemic, and then we got scuppered by another bit of pandemic, and then we were supposed to open Helios there last year, but my plane out of New York was delayed by 3 days, so I missed the weekend that we were supposed to do the show on. So fingers crossed one day we'll actually get to Bondi Festival. But we really have enjoyed planning lots of things with them. But when we first met Bondi, it was run by Rachel and by Phil Spencer, and they programmed The Gods, The Gods, The Gods in, for 2020, and that got cancelled. And then we were going to do a listening experience of an album called Half Man, Half Bull, when we weren't allowed to fly into Australia, and that got cancelled. And then Rachel's still there, but Phil left to go to the Opera House. So then he programmed the Gods into the Sydney Opera House, which was just wild. And in no way something that we could have kind of imagined being the outcome of me deciding to say hello to Phil and Leland when they were having a beer in a bar. I was just like, oh, I've read about you two, you seem cool, I'd love you to see our show. And me just, flicking through the physical honeypot guide at that time and going, oh, they seem to be interested in work that I'm interested in, that Phil's interested in. For that very brief introduction to lead to, working at one of the most iconic cultural organisations in the world was cool.
And that led to Sydney Opera House, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, with Phil. I think we were, in one of our previous episodes, we were talking with Michelle Pearson, and she mentioned that she obviously, like you did, looks through the program. We used to do a printed booklet before we kind of all went online, but even online, just kind of nurturing those relationships, because you'd never know, like in 5 years' time, they might have moved on to another organisation or another festival. So like keeping in touch with them, the work might not be quite right for that festival, that person at that particular time, but you never know where that person or that relationship is going to go. And obviously Phil with Bondi Feast, as it was back then, festival, obviously landed a job with Sydney Opera House. I remember talking to him on the phone, it's like, Andy, I need a support letter. I need this little thing that I can put on my boss's desk that kind of talks about, Wright and Grainger and how great they are. So, and I remember sort of crafting this little email and stuff, and then he was like, right, that's gonna get it over the finish line. So
we were so giddy about it. I mean, it's like
how did that come about, and what was the journey between meeting Phil and Sydney Opera House?
Oh, well, him trying to book us at Bondi and it getting cancelled because of COVID, and then him moving jobs, but kind of keeping that conversation. And often this is the way, exactly what you were just saying, often it relates to people. It's very easy to forget that all organisations are run by people, and it's very easy to think you're talking to a big organisation who are, it's kind of impenetrable cultural monolith, or whatever. But it all comes down to good chats with good people. And so we've been really happy to make friends with Phil, and remain friends with him from a distance, so that when he ended up at the Opera House, the conversation with Phil was still the same. We weren't suddenly having to start a new conversation with the Opera House. It was still just us talking to Phil about the fact that he liked our work and we liked him, and the spaces that he had available. And that space had shifted from being a festival, Bondi festival space, to being a studio space at the Opera House. And with that comes a lot of different bureaucracy, but that person-to-person chat had the same integrity as it did. And now Phil's moved on to the next place, and that person-to-person chat still has the same integrity. So I think that's also the gorgeous thing about Honeypot, is that you meet people rather than organisations. You get to sit and chat to people and understand what they're excited about, and that feels so much more approachable than meeting a huge cultural organisation. But we were giddy, man. To go to work at Sydney Opera House, that was good. Especially. Actually, I'm sure that people in Sydney aren't even over it in terms of that circular quay and the hugely iconic architecture of that building and the bridge and all that stuff. Walking to work there was such a huge highlight, and to the idea that the work that we'd made and that we'd wrangled through, that Phil and I had made and brought here and tested out, and then Meg and Tom had joined the team as dramaturg and music producer, and that kind of big remaking process we did with that particular show, that had led to being giving us permission and allowing us to tell those stories in one of those huge world stages. It was mega, and we're probably still giddy about it.
Maybe we could just talk a little bit more about how you've developed the work and adapted it and grown it. Like, what's been the process of, like, for example, the gods, like, from when you first presented that all those years back to the piece that you have now? Is that work developed and grown because of the Onward touring and programming that you've received?
Yeah, and we never know. We're just starting to now, actually. Like, at this point, and from being at Adelaide Fringe this year in 2024, starting to understand how to piece together a longer trajectory for originating a piece of work. Like Orpheus, that we've been touring forever, we made to do 5 shows. We've now done nearly 600 around the world, but never really anticipated that happening. So we made the gods. Phil and I first made it in 2020, and we were sat writing it in a loft at Soho Playhouse at Darren Lee Cole's gaff, in the freezing New York winter, and brought it to Perth and then to Adelaide in 2020. And it was exciting but scrappy as. There was me and Phil, and Yoshika Colwell was the third performer in that. And it was at Joanne Hartstone's venue in the Botanic Gardens. And it was kind of wild and exciting. I think a lot of people watched it and went, oh, that's wild and exciting. And a lot of people went, I don't really know what you're doing, but I can see that you're doing something, and doing something that I haven't necessarily experienced before. So we got quite a lot of industry in to see it, and it felt like there was about to be a big trajectory for it. We felt like some big things were about to kind of, big things by our standards, so not big things in the grand scheme of the world, but for us, click into place. And obviously we all went home for the pandemic and kind of everything got put on the back burner. And then in 2022, Phil and I sat and had a hot chocolate in our local cafe, and decided we should dig back in on it, but get back under the bonnet of it. And we kind of realised 2 years down the line, since then we'd made 2 new albums, and the music production was really good on those, and we liked the music production on those, and the narrative was much clearer on those. So we thought, we can probably do a better job of the gods, but we thought there was something in the heart of it, of the gods, that we really loved still. So Megan Drury came on board as a dramaturg and helped us kind of reshape how the stories, because there's 4 stories that weave across the show, across 12 tracks. They helped us kind of figure out how those stories best sit alongside each other and differentiate from each other. And our friend Tom Figgins from back home is a very good music producer, so him and Phil rewrote all the music and reproduced all the music. So we ended up with what felt like a pretty tight bit of work. So then when we brought it back out, we did it in Edinburgh in 2022, and then brought it back out here in 2023 to really kind of hit that marketplace again. To go, right, this amount of time has passed. The one in 2020 was exciting but scrappy. We've got better at our jobs and got better at our storytelling. And a huge part of getting better at our jobs and getting better at our storytelling is by being able to invite other people into that process. Phil and I, somehow, we never have conversations about work or the work. Phil writes music, I write words, and then we do it. Like, we've never rehearsed Orpheus. We've never had a conversation about Orpheus. We just do it, and now we've done it so many times, we know how it works. And similarly with Helios this year, actually, we weren't in the same place at all. We were in different countries and had very little chat about it. And I've just understood it by doing it. What's gorgeous about expanding that creative team is that you need to explain it more, or discuss your ideas more, or articulate more stuff, and that allows other people to go, I don't get that, why are you doing that, this doesn't make any sense. So that process felt really valuable creatively, and then because the show was better, the kind of conversations with industry has got better and bigger, and so that we did a 4-month tour of that last year around Australia, which was brilliant. That led to us getting a few tiny shows. 3, they weren't tiny, they were massive, but we just did 3 shows at Edinburgh, at Summer Hall, at late night, and then that's kicked off a whole new life of conversations around the show, which is great. But all of it is kind of traceable to the Adelaide industry chats. You know, when Phil and I were going, oh yeah, let's try and do the gods again, we knew we always wanted to land it here in order that it could then find future life. You know, what's lovely in 2007, when we were first doing shows, Fringes were the end goal. We go make a show, do it at the Fringe, tick, good. Now Fringes are the jumping off point. Now we come to Adelaide to go, right, we've made this new thing, let's do it here and see what people are interested about it for the next stuff, which is I'm very grateful for that shift in perspective, because it allows specifically Adelaide, I guess, and specifically Honeypot, to much more of a conversation rather than a hard sell. You know, you're showing stuff to people and going, right, I've made this. What in that is interesting to you, and what would you be excited about that if it came your way? And that feels like a much more wholesome conversation, an equal conversation, than the idea that you're just trying to sell someone a show and they can say yes or no. Mm-hmm. You know, that kind of peer-to-peer exchange, I think, is a really valuable consideration.
I think you do it really well. Like, you guys, you know, it's not, you know, you often sort of come to Adelaide and you'll bring 2-3 pieces of work, mm-hmm. you know, which is fantastic, but they're also slightly different in terms of potentially where you want to take the work. And then having that industry outreach that you do so well, you know, you really you invite people to the shows, you come to every Honeypot events and hives, you have those engaged talks and developments. Like, how do you approach Honeypot now? You know, like, in terms of, like, is it a challenge to approach Honeypot with 3 works as opposed to 1 work? And what's the rationale now of being part of Honeypot for you?
I still do everything the same that I did in 2016. I sit and read about everyone who's coming and what everyone's looking for and what everyone's interested in, and then make notes about who might be interested in what we're doing. I think it's important to understand the difference between people who might be interested in what we're doing and the people who I'd like to be interested in what we're doing. You know, there's loads of people I'd be like, oh, I wish they loved what we did, and they're not gonna, and that's fine. And it's pointless trying to force a square peg into a round hole. But that kind of shift of going, oh, who is interested in what? And now because we've been a bunch, we know more people than we did. So a lot of those conversations feel more like catching up with some mates, which is lovely. And in terms of those Honeypot sessions, like this year, we spent more time at Honeypot just kind of waving at people and going, I'll catch you in a minute, because they're people that we know, which is lovely. And we're very lucky to be, you know, very privileged to be at a point where we've now been here enough that we know a bunch of people. But like there's someone coming to Helios tonight who I don't know, I haven't met. I do think they'd be really interested in the work. So I've emailed them, invited them, they're coming, and I want to know if they're in, you know, I want to know if they want to tour it. So there's still absolutely all those connections, and that feels the same as it did, that hope of going, oh, I think from what I've read about you, I think this is in your lane, and I want that to be the case because I want to come to where you are. So the kind of, I guess the amount of prep sounds contrived, but that kind of research I think is really valuable. Yeah. And that's still the case.
Yeah. That's something we definitely try and impart on people taking part in a Honeypot. Read up, research, see who's a good fit, you know, make initial connections, come see them at the hives, start a conversation. Yeah.
Because if you're sitting down at someone's table at Honeypot and going, and you've queued, and you sit down at a table and you go, all right, so what do you do? You're just kind of wasting some other people's time. Like, what's amazing is that you provide all that information, so I can learn what everyone does and have a reasonable idea, and I can walk into Honeypot and look at the big board of who's there and go, oh, these 7 people I really want to chat to, because I think that's a good link, and these 10 people I'd love to be friends with, but I don't think they're going to want my show at their festival. So I think that's so valuable that you provide all that information, and hopefully it you know, makes that kind of match-up process more elegant.
Yeah. And in terms of the last couple of years, for example, you know, you've been working with Joanne Hartstone and Tom Oliver and Hay Dowling. How have those relationships come about, and how are you working with people here in Australia when you bring work?
Joanne Hartstone, we've worked with every time we've gone to Adelaide. She's kind of the centrifugal point of our Adelaide. She's like the Adelaide nexus. And that is in loads of beautiful ways. She's a brilliant presenter and knows the Adelaide Fringe really well. So when we were coming here early on, she was such a guiding light in how things worked, or the way things would best work. And that local knowledge isn't to be underestimated. You know, to arrive in a place you've never been and assume it'll be the same as other places you've been is obviously naive. So having someone who can help guide us through that was so valuable. And Joanne's a real key part of... Well, I was about to say Joanne's a key part of our Adelaide family. She is. I think we're probably actually part of Joanne's Adelaide family. You know, she kind of has this beautiful ecosystem that she's put together over the years, and that's in part industrial, and in part pastoral, and in part social, and in part creative, and all those things are so valuable. So we're really grateful to her for constantly allowing us to be part of that ecosystem and inviting us to be part of the ecosystem. Tom Oliver, we've recently started working with to see how we can start piecing our work together further afield in Australia. That was circumstantial that last year, throughout the whole tour, I thought I was about to leave to go and do a project in New York that kept being pushed back. And I was like, oh, as soon as I go, I didn't think I'd be here. I thought I'd be here for like a week or something and then have to hop it. And I was like, as soon as I go, there'll be a lot of admin that needs doing that Phil, you know, shouldn't be expected to just magically do on top of all the other stuff that he already does. So we brought on Tom to help with that, and that was just a real joy. And that man has energy for days. He's got energy and ideas that are like, it's like a hyper-intelligent toddler. Like, it's incredible. I'm like, how have you still got this amount of get up and go? Yeah. Mine got up and went a while ago, and he was like on it.
Yeah. This is Tom Wynnum, who's literally set up Wynnum Fringe.
He set up a whole festival
after the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because he went back home and thought, I know.
Yeah.
I'll set up a Fringe in probably one of the hardest climates.
Yeah.
And has done a fantastic job. And like you say, he's just a real energizer bunny of like.
He's incredible, but he's set up Wynnum Fringe whilst also being like an international performer and a brilliant singer, and he's still in loads of shows, still on national tour. Like, it's amazing. So that's a treat. And then Hay Dowling, we've known Peter for years as a friend, and really enjoyed, hugely enjoyed all the work that she produces and kind of looks after here. Adore Jamie McDowell and Tom Thumb, adore Abanda Man, adore all the smashed stuff that she does. So this year was the first time I worked with her and John formally to do the gods in the garden. And I think knowing that Peter has a very good sense of those slightly more offbeat, slightly late at night, slightly gig-based shows, it felt like the gods was a really good conversation to have with them. And also because we wanted to run 2 after parties in the garden kind of till the early hours, felt like a real good kind of partnership, and that's been great. You know, it's been really nice to have a support system, because we've never been in the garden before either. Have a support system in there has made that, being in a whole new venue, a very easy process. And we just say yes to loads of stuff. So normally when someone just goes, oh, do you fancy doing this, lads? We go, yeah. And that leads to lots of great friendships and lots of kind of, I guess, some overlapping responsibilities, some similar job titles, but lots of, it's always just people making stuff happen, and making it happen in the most kind of competent way we're able.
But being busy, it has its challenges. I mean, we've been asking a lot of session speakers and panelists over these Fringe pods about how they maintain their well-being and health. Mm-hmm. And I guess, you know, success and well-being can sometimes not always go hand in hand. I mean, how do you keep yourself so busy but also maintain, a good aspect of well-being and health? Do you think what would you say is key for your well-being?
Yeah, good question. I thoroughly enjoy all of it. So all the work, all the research, all the chats, all the hangouts. Like, I think in that sense, I personally am quite extroverted, and that gives me a lot of energy and a lot of joy. But the amount that I could do in the Edinburgh Fringe festivals in 2007, 8, 9, 10, where with a different company we'd be running. We'd start running shows at midday and finish at 5 a.m. after we'd run a bar on a club night, and just get up and do the next thing, do it again the next day and have one day off a month. Like, I couldn't do that now. So now I am conscious that I do actively need to rest and actively need to tell myself that that's all right, that spending your daytimes doing not a great deal is okay, because from 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. I will be going flat out, seeing shows, hanging out, having meetings, doing a show, doing 2 or 3 shows a night. So I think academically I have to tell myself in my mid-30s that resting and eating are important, whereas resting and eating didn't previously seem as important or as necessary. But now, eat broccoli. Eat broccoli. That's the answer. That's my answer. Eat broccoli.
Fantastic. Yeah, definitely eat more greens during a festival. It can be
always
something so easy to obtain but so hard to put in front of you.
I know, and people laugh at me about it, but eating broccoli is that'll sort out most ailments.
And going forward, are there any sort of future touring opportunities or collaborations Wright & Grainger are looking for or excited about that you can potentially tell us about?
Yeah, we this year has been we came to Adelaide with 2 intentions this year. One of them was to figure out how to start touring our shows over here with Australian companies and performers, in order that our capacity to present that work wasn't as reliant on me and Phil being able to get on a plane, both ecologically and time-wise. That's a bit of a an increasingly tricky imperative to have. And we've already started booking out Helios with an Australian performer, with Jamie McDowell in the kind of storytelling role of that. And that's happened maybe quicker, I don't know, much more kind of fluently and fluidly than maybe I would have expected, which is gorgeous. And it feels like a lot of our shows are wound up in mine and Phil's specific identities and personalities, but that's only because it's just me and Phil doing them all the time. And as soon as someone else, puts their identity and personality into a show, it'll live and breathe in their bodies, which is brilliant. So that was one priority which we're really excited to have kind of started, and that will hopefully then knock on to other shows that we'll do the same thing with. And then the other thing we want to try and do, Phil and I have always, like I said before, we don't really talk about the actual making process. We just get on and do the show and hope it's cohesive, and it becomes more and more cohesive the more and more we do it. But the next shows we're making are bigger, and we'll have a lot more people in them, but also have more people involved in the making of them, and be at a larger scale. And there's a couple of aspects of that. We really want to introduce a visual language into our work. So whereas the spoken word and the music play really hard with each other, we want to introduce a visual language, which we're excited about. A lot of different circus in that. And obviously, there's no version of making a show with circus in it where you're just going, oh yeah, let's have a go. So that language needs a much greater consideration. And with that, we want to meet with, and work with designers who are going to meet the work at the same level, and sound designers and all that kind of other production aspect, and those other artists that kind of help to elevate work to another level. So we were really keen to start those conversations, and we're going to start developing a show with Gravity and Other Myths next year, which feels hugely exciting, to build a world which has mine and Phil's kind of spoken word and storytelling language, and Gravity and Other Myths is quite incredible, physical, just all the magic they can do with just people's bodies is amazing. And then we're also making a show called Medusa with Lauren Eisinger, who's a great producer that we met last year at Honeypot. And it was really nice because she'd sent loads of people, on the ticket reports, there was loads of people down under Lauren Eisinger. And we saw her at Honeypot and we were like, right, how come you sent 5 or 6 people to our show? She's like, because I'm interested in what you do. And we were like, that's good, because we're interested in what you do. So those conversations started last year, and now, 12 months later, that's turned into some active development and producing of a new project with her and other partners that she's really keen to bring on board. So the next few shows that we make will be created in Australia, and produced in Australia, which is, if you asked us in 2016 whether we'd be producing work on the other side of the world, we would never have guessed that would have got us, we would have got to this point.
Yeah. It's been fantastic getting to know you over the years, and we're thankful that you keep coming back to Adelaide and Honeypot every time, and feel like this is a great opportunity and platform to develop and create those connections. And
big time.
Wonderful to have all these stories and nods to all the people you've met over the years. I think it's a testament to not just yourself, but the work and the community that you've also forged and driven whilst being here. So thanks again for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
I could talk more and more about everything that you're doing and have done, but we have sort of run out of time a little bit. But if people want to find a bit more about yourself and up and coming work and projects, where can they find you?
We're on Instagram as Wright Grainger, and that's mainly just me haphazardly posting things on Instagram. At some point we'll figure out a marketing strategy. And our website is wrightandgrainger.com, and you can get in touch with Phil and I there. And there's me and Phil, and we have a producer in the UK called Andy, but there's just us. There's no, so any platform you find, it'll get through to one of us on our phones.
Well, thanks again for your time today.
Thanks heaps for having me.
It's been wonderful talking to you. Well, thank you for listening to today's episode of Fringe Pod. If you want to find out more about episodes, you can subscribe to our socials, ADL Fringe, and subscribe to Fringe Pod wherever you get your podcasts.